Good morning and welcome the members and guests, staff to the February meeting of the authority. It's good to, I think we're 8 people today, 8 members today. And we're going to have John Gardner on the phone.
From a ditch.
At some point. From a ditch. Sorry.
We're not laughing, John.
No, we're not. Absolutely not. A number of items to cover today, but before we do, just to remind everybody, because I always forget at the end of the meeting to do this, the March meeting will be in the New York office as well, March 6th, and we look forward to having a full house if we can get a full house. Also, for the members, you are aware that the annual board questionnaire is floating and drifting around somewhere. When you get to it, and I hope that's soon, get it back to Kathy Van Dyke as soon as you can. She receives them anonymously, so she doesn't know who's sending in, but she knows how many she has, and I think she's waiting now for 4. That said, let's move to the meeting. The first order of business is the approval of minutes. You've all had a chance to read them. They're behind tab 1. Are there any recommended revisions? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve?
So moved.
Thank you very much. Second? Thank you, Jerry. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries unanimously. Mr. Romsky, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Finance Committee met yesterday in New York City and also in Albany by video conference. We addressed 4 financings: the Catholic Health System Obligated Group, Maimonides Medical Center, Rockefeller University, and the Terrence Cardinal Cook Healthcare Center. After some discussions, including with the Department of Health, who on a number of those issued their own letter of recommendation that was on the Catholic Health System and Maimonides, I believe. We recommend that those be approved at today's board meeting. We also then discussed 2 TELP offerings, SUNY and the other one
United Health Services.
United Health Service. Thank you very much, Portia. And we also adopted a resolution recommending that they be approved at today's board meeting. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Romsky, thank you. Are there questions for Jerry?
Oh, I think I also forgot to mention, we also had the meeting minutes
Hello?
from the December meeting.
You did.
Hi, you got John Gardner?
We did.
Yes.
Hey, John.
Hey.
You are now conferenced into the board meeting.
Okay, good. I'm gonna hit my mute button so that I don't disturb everybody.
Thanks, John. Good to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Mr. President, I think you have the next agenda item.
Thank you. Good morning. Behind tab 3 is the New York University transaction summary update with David Ostrander and bond counsel Neil Kaplan of Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood, and Patrick McGlashan of the McGlashan Law Firm presenting.
David, Neil, Patrick, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just have a brief update for the members before Neil and Patrick present the documents. This is a New York University financing that we brought to the board back in December for a resolution to proceed. Just a couple of updates since that time. We received PACB approval on December 19th, and we also have the TEFRA approval in place, and the secret review was completed yesterday. So the transaction's moving along. We expect to mail shortly after assuming the board approves the documents. Just one other item of interest that I wanted to point out to the board. I doubt you've had a chance to look at the POS on the table, but you might want to notice there is a sub-series that's labeled green bonds. DASNY's done this once before in a Columbia University transaction back in 2016. And really the only purpose of labeling the sub-series green bonds is to allow investors to invest directly in projects that the university has identified as promoting environmental sustainability purposes. So the university did identify 3 projects, 181 Mercer, 370 J Street in Brooklyn, as well as the School of Medicine and Science building over on 435 East 30th Street. The university intends to pursue LEED certification for all 3 of those facilities. So really all that means for the university is on an annual basis. They will provide disclosure regarding the amount of proceeds spent at those facilities. And once the LEED certification is received, they will disclose that on EMA to investors to let them know that that has been completed. But there's really no obligation on the university's part. It's really just to let the investors know if and when that has been completed, they will post that. So just a piece of information for the board that we thought might be interesting.
What happens if they don't get LEED certification?
There's really no obligation. They have every intention to do so, and the expectation is that they will do that, but it is fully disclosed to investors that
Potential.
there's no obligation on their part. So
Thanks, David.
That's all I can say.
Neil?
Good morning. Before the members for their consideration this morning are 4 series resolutions, each of which authorize a separate series of bonds under the authority's New York University Revenue Bond Resolution, which was adopted in 2008. Our discussion will be somewhat brief today because this is actually the 10th issuance of bonds under the series resolution, the proceeds of which are being loaned to New York University pursuant to a loan agreement that was approved by the authority and entered into in 2008 as well. All 4 series resolutions are identical to one another except for the series designations, and each authorizes the issuance of a series of bonds up to a maximum of $1.25 billion. However, the combined principal amount of all bonds that may be issued pursuant to all 4 series resolutions is also $1.25 billion, so that each time bonds are issued under one of the series resolutions, it effectively reduces the amount remaining to be authorized and issued under any of the all of the other resolutions. The reason why 4 resolutions are being adopted is essentially to provide flexibility to the authority and to the institution. One is to issue the bonds at one or more times, although it's expected that all of these bonds will be issued in one issuance. It also provides some flexibility on the tax side, whereby by issuing some of the bonds as taxable bonds over the life of the bond issue, which in this case is up to 30 years, the university would be able to float the proceeds of the taxable bonds among the various purposes, which would enable the institution to have some flexibility as to how they operate their facilities over the next 30 years. In addition, the use of 4 series resolutions enables the bonds to, as I said, be issued more than once, and also be issued either as a direct purchase or as a public offering or both, although the expectation is that these bonds will be publicly offered. My colleague Patrick McGlashan will now talk about the series resolutions themselves.
Thank you, Neil. Good morning. As Neil has described, the Series 2019 resolutions are identical in all respects other than with respect to the series designation. Each Series 2019 resolution delegates to various officers of the authority the power to make certain determinations for each series. The principal amount of the series to be issued and the principal amount of each maturity, provided that the aggregate principal amount does not exceed $1,250 million, capped as discussed earlier. The maturity of the bonds, provided that no bond shall mature later than 40 years from the date of issuance. The type of interest the bonds will bear, whether fixed or variable, together with the interest rate on the bonds, provided that the true interest cost of the bonds that are fixed rate bonds and the initial interest rate of variable interest rate bonds shall not exceed 7.5% per annum if issued as tax-exempt bonds, and 10% per annum if issued as federally taxable bonds. It is expected that the bonds will be fixed rate bonds. Whether the bonds will be sold public or in a private sale, whether the bonds will be sold in a direct placement, The denomination or denominations of the bonds provided, however, that if the bonds are sold to a purchaser in a direct placement, the minimum authorized denomination shall be no less than $100,000 and integral multiples of $5,000 above that amount. The redemption dates and prices, which may be equal to a percentage of the principal amount of the bonds to be redeemed, plus the accrued interest to the redemption date, and may alternatively be a make-whole amount that is based on the expected rate of return to such holders. Whether any bonds will be subject to purchase in lieu of optional redemption, and the terms in which such purchase is to be made, the project or components thereof for which the bonds are to be issued, together with the allocation or reallocation from time to time of the proceeds of the bonds to pay costs of the various components of the project. Whether the bonds will be issued as tax-exempt bonds or federally taxable bonds, and whether to obtain credit enhancement for the payment of all or a portion of the principal or sinking fund installment of and interest on the bonds, and the terms and condition of such credit enhancement. Each Series 2019 resolution further authorized various officers to prepare and deliver a preliminary official statement and to prepare, execute, and deliver a final official statement in connection with any public offering of the authorized bonds, to execute one or more bond purchase agreement with the respective underwriters for the bonds in connection with the sale of the bonds, containing such terms and conditions that are customary in connection with the sale of the authority's bonds. In any direct placement of the bonds, each Series 2019 resolution also authorizes the execution of bond purchase or bond placement agreements with any such purchaser and, if applicable, the placement agent. And in addition, each Series 2019 resolution authorizes various officers of the authority to execute all other documents and do all things necessary or convenient in connection with the sale and issuance of the authorized bond. With that, I turn it back over to Neil.
Thanks, Patrick. As Dave had mentioned earlier, the proceeds of these bonds will be applied to pay costs of issuance of the bonds. Although I should note that only the taxable bond proceeds will be applied to pay costs of issuance of both the taxable and the tax-exempt bonds, in order, again, to provide additional flexibility on the tax side, the private use side for these bonds. The proceeds will also be used directly or indirectly to pay costs of new money projects and to repay amounts drawn under a line of credit that the university has taken out with respect to these projects. Several of the projects that are being funded have previously been funded in part by prior bonds issued by the authority under the general resolution. The bulk of the proceeds of these bonds will be used to fund the construction of a building at 181 Mercer Street, which is an academic, athletic, residential, and administrative building, which was also funded in part with the 2018 bonds. Their proceeds will also be used to complete the School of Medicine Science Building, which had been financed through a number of series of bonds since 2000, I believe it was 2015 or 2016. The university's cogeneration facility at its Washington Square campus, upgrades to laboratories at the Tandon School of Engineering in downtown Brooklyn, as well as substantial renovations to science laboratories and routine capital projects for the university. A portion of the tax-exempt proceeds will also be applied to pay costs of leasehold improvements to medical office space for NYU's physicians. Taxable bonds will also be applied to pay costs of acquiring and renovating an apartment building that will ultimately be used by faculty members of the university. As I noted, this will be the 10th time that the board has been asked to authorize the issuance of bonds under the 2008 resolution. These bonds, like all other bonds previously issued under the general resolution, are special obligations of the authority, payable solely from amounts paid by the university pursuant to the loan agreement and from amounts in the funds and accounts held by the trustee under the general resolution. All of the bonds issued pursuant to the series resolution adopted today will be on a parity with each other and all other bonds issued under the general resolution. The university's obligations to make payments under the loan agreement is a general obligation of the university, and these bonds will not be secured either by a mortgage or a pledge of any of the university's revenues or a debt service reserve fund. It should be noted that bonds issued under another resolution of the authority issued prior to 2008 are secured by a pledge of tuition and fee revenues of the university. We'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you for a very thorough presentation. Thank you very much. Are there questions for Patrick or Neil or David? Please, go ahead.
Why is this in this instance is not secure?
Well, I think that is really more of a marketing issue that I think a determination has been made that that the university's ratings conform to the board standards as to the security that's required. And David, you might be able to.
Right. I mean, the university has a AA to AA minus rating. Under DASNY's financing guidelines, no security is required. And when marketing the bonds, the underwriter, as in the past, has marketed NYU bonds without security, and the investors are not looking for security on the bonds.
So it's really a market determination. As you know, we changed our financing guidelines over the summer, and basically, it's a market-based determination. Even prior to that, in the previous financing guidelines, where we did have security requirements, those previous financing guidelines did not require anything other than the general obligation of the institutions.
Wellington, thanks for your question. Are there others?
I know when we approved this back in December, we raised a question, or we asked a question about any community issues, and I think there were none back then. Just to update it, we're still clear on that.
That's
front.
correct. No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. If there are no other questions, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Wellington, thank you. Is there a second? John, thank you very much. John Delafield, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Gentlemen, thank you. All three of
Thank you.
Thank you. Behind tab 5 is the proposed Maimonides Medical Center financing with Gerard Clauser and Andy Purcell, presenting the transaction summary and memo.
I think it's Kathy.
Oh, I'm sorry, 4. I looked for my glasses on.
That's fine. You're right. Thank you. We're doing 4.
Behind tab 4, my apologies, is the proposed Catholic Health System obligated group financing, which Gerard Clauser and Andy Purcell, presenting the transaction summary.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Both of you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, transaction summary and staff report submitted to the members is seeking authorization for resolution to proceed with Catholic Health System Obligated Group in an amount not to exceed $220 million. I'm pleased to present this transaction with CHS Obligated Group, as it'll bring the system back into the DASNY portfolio. The system issued bonds away from DASNY through their local development corp. 2015, and this will bring them back into the portfolio. We anticipate the transaction with fixed and or variable rate bonds, tax exempt and or taxable bonds, maturities not to exceed 30 years, sold at one or more times through a negotiated offering and or a private placement. This transaction has new money and refunding components, approximately $146 million in new money bonds and $49 million in the current refunding of the DASNY variable rate 2006 A through D and 2008 bonds. The financing will also include a swap termination of $2.6 million related to 2008 bonds. The transaction will include fixed and variable rate bonds, with the issuance of fixed rate bonds to refund $49 million of the 2006 A through D and 2008 variable rate bonds, as well as a fixed rate new money projects of approximately $98 million. There will also be a money variable rate portion of the transaction issued in the same amount as the variable rate bonds refunded, approximately $49 million. This restructuring of the system will result in level debt service for the system. It will also result in maximum annual debt service on the debt being reduced by approximately $1.1 million. It is not anticipated that there will be savings as a result of the refunding of the variable rate bonds. The financing will address the front-loaded debt service profile and creates a level debt service profile, referenced in the chart that was handed out to the members.
Yeah, on the table, there's a handout chart, which is a graph that the institution's financial advisor put together, and it's pretty compelling and explaining and demonstrates why the system's looking to create overall level debt service. And I'll walk you through it very briefly. The top chart is if we just issued the new money debt with none of the restructuring, no refunding, you can see that their maximum annual debt service, roughly in 2020, is $28.7 million. The weighted average cost of capital for this entire debt portfolio would be 4.82%. The bottom chart is a result of the restructuring and the extension of some of the maturities and layering and creating overall level debt service. If you look at that, the institution's able to reduce their maximum annual debt service by approximately $5 million and reduce their weighted average cost of capital by 50 basis points. This saves the institution tremendously, and it also saves the state on a reimbursement basis. So, as Gerard mentioned, their plan of finance is to create overall level system debt service, and you can see the benefits in the chart.
Okay. The obligated group currently consists of 3 hospitals on 4 campuses. CHS Inc. is the active parent. Mercy Hospital of Buffalo is one of the hospitals. Kenmore Mercy Hospital, and Sisters of Charity Hospital and Sisters of Charity Hospital St. Joseph Campus is the other current member. As a part of the plan of finance, additional members are expected to be added to the obligated group, subject to DOH review and approval. The addition of the members contemplates a fully integrated healthcare system. Our potential new members are Mount St. Mary's Hospital of Niagara Falls, Macaulay Seton Home Care Corporation, and Niagara Homemakers Services, Inc. DOH has reviewed all 3 of these members, and the opinion is that there is no further action required for them to join the obligated group. St. Francis Geriatric and Healthcare Services is currently a senior living facility which has filed an application for enriched living. It's currently under review, and it may not require establishment or further review, but we should be learning about that before too long. There are 4 other potential members that require further review. Those include Catholic Health Infusion Pharmacy, Trinity Medical, it's a captive PC, Niagara Medicine, also a captive PC, and KMH Homes, which is a real estate holding company. Security for the transaction. There will be an amended and restated master trust indenture, which will be driven by the market. The amended restated MTI is expected to relieve certain covenant constraints for the system, and DASNY will not be a party to the MTI. The amended and restated MTI will be a joint and several obligation of each member of the obligated group, secured by mortgages on real property and a pledge of gross receipts. The expected ratings are Baa1 from Moody's and BBB+ from S&P. Regarding the project status, there are approximately 14 CONs, 7 notices, and 4 infrastructure projects which do not require CONs. The status of the CONs is very good. There are no major contingencies outstanding, and it is understood that any remaining contingencies will be addressed prior to the release of POS. The projects are summarized in the transaction summary, as well as there was a very detailed identification of the projects in the DOH letter which we've received. We worked very closely with DOH on this transaction, and the DOH letter has been provided to support the transaction. I don't know whether John Valtudo is here representing the Department of Health, if you may have any comments or that you may want to make.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Just brief comments. Good morning, everyone.
John, thank you.
The Catholic Health System is a voluntary, not-for-profit corporation and has integrated healthcare delivery systems serving the Western New York region that is currently jointly sponsored by the Diocese of Buffalo, New York, and Catholic Health Ministries. Trinity Health and the Diocese of Buffalo are the corporate members of the Catholic Health System with equal ownership interests. The Catholic Health System has total operating revenue of approximately $1.1 billion and encompasses over 891 certified beds, 1,500 affiliated physicians, 9,000 employees, and provides close to 43,000 inpatient discharges and over 110,000 emergency department visits and 800,000 ambulatory care visits. The Catholic Health System has a slight market lead position in Erie County, capturing 43% of the Erie County discharges, with Florida Health share currently at 41%. The Department of Health does recommend approval of the resolution to proceed with the understanding, as already articulated, that the Department approval for the addition of the 5 of the proposed new members of the obligated group and associated projects, as well as contingent due diligence regarding economic life are needed before the POS may be issued. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Staff recommends a resolution to proceed in an amount not to exceed $220 million with a term not to exceed 30 years. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Gerard. Are there questions for Gerard? Andy? Please, Paul.
Yeah, just so I understand, there are basically, in terms of the restructuring, 2 things going on. On the one hand, the term is being brought into alignment with the life of the assets, and the front loading is being leveled out.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, and those 2 things together are resulting in the
Benefit that this, yes, that's correct.
That's right.
And what's the is there the level funding structure is now available to them and it wasn't before? I mean, was the thinking about the origin of the front-loaded, the original front-loaded structure?
Yeah, I mean, DOH, obviously we did this with the Montefiore transaction where we created level debt service for them. They've started to recognize that this is a tool for hospitals to help themselves position themselves much more favorably with, 1, the rating agencies, and 2, for future capital projects by having level debt. You can see on the top chart that if we just did what we normally do, which is layer on the new money, you can see what it does, and their debt service is still front-loaded. But by being able to create level overall, it puts them in a much more solid financial footing.
Okay, so it's bringing in the new money is what creates the front-loaded structure.
Well, and again, every deal that they do, that problem starts to exacerbate itself, right?
Okay.
So if they go to the market like they did a deal with us in 2012, then they did a deal with the LDC in 2015. So that debt that they took on in 2000 just makes that problem on the front end much greater. By leveling it out, they get rid of that problem, and it puts them in a much more solid financial footing. And their expectation, I would imagine, is any deal they do in the future will be layered on level across the system.
And a different question, maybe I could have teased this out from the analysis, but so there are 4 religious sponsors. Is the group exposed to the obligations of the religious sponsors, the Diocese of Buffalo and others? Or? No.
No, just the hospitals that are in the obligated group that are responsible for the debt. And only,
But the obligated group doesn't have any exposure to the obligations of the sponsors.
no.
Of the diocese.
Of the Diocese of Buffalo.
Are there other questions for Gerard and Andy? For the record, I'd express some interest in understanding how the obligated group would continue to meet its unfunded pension liabilities and have the capital necessary to operate. If they're paying back 10% of what's unfunded every year. But Gerard, you've explained at the Finance Committee, I just wanted to get into the record here, that they have not pledged, but they have let you know what their intent is with regards to paying back that unfunded liability.
Yes, they have. They have a plan to have the unfunded liability funded at 80% by 2026.
Mr. Chairman, if I might just make one comment. As you know, we've undertaken a series of process efficiency initiatives under One DASNY.
Yes.
One of the big things that we did was to streamline the process so that, for example, the tax diligence could be completed prior to the mailing of the POS rather than prior to adoption of documents. And we had indicated back in the summer that we were working with the Department of Health on a number of issues in a similar vein. So, for example, the satisfaction of contingencies, also instead of being a gating factor needing to be addressed prior to a board meeting, now is also going to be addressed prior to the mailing of the preliminary official statement. And I think the memo here also reflects the fact that the issue with respect to the obligated group review and approval, that also is an issue that would be addressed prior to the mailing of the preliminary official statement.
Thank you for the explanation.
If I can ask, it's good news that this group is back and is back financing through DASNY. Is that related in some way to the One DASNY initiative or to the?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We went out and met with them back in late December, I think it was, when they were looking to pull this financing together, and we talked about the One DASNY initiative, how that would relate to them. They obviously have the option of using the Buffalo LDC, and between the institution and their financial advisor, they chose DASNY as their issuer.
Specifically mentioned is one of the example would be the MTI being market driven, DASNY no longer being a party to the MTI. Also, I think our collaboration with the Department of Health on this transaction made considerable advances for the hospital, and so I think those are a few examples where the One DASNY initiative was instrumental.
Good.
It's great news.
Yeah.
It's great news. Thank you all. Hearing no additional questions, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Gerard, thank you. Beryl, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Is there none opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Gentlemen, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gerard, I gather you all are going to be here for the next presentation.
I'm still on the hot seat here, yeah.
Double duty.
Behind tab 5 is the proposed Maimonides Medical Center financing with Gerard Clauser and Andy Purcell, presenting the transaction summary and memo.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the transaction summary, staff report provided to the members seeking authorization for resolution to proceed for the Maimonides Medical Center. We anticipate a transaction with fixed and or variable rate bonds, tax exempt and or taxable bonds with maturities not to exceed 40 years, sold at one or more times through a negotiated offering and or a private placement. We're requesting an amount not to exceed $165 million. This is a new money transaction, and the purpose is the financing of 2 certificates of needs and some non-CON projects. They involve the construction and renovation of the emergency department, including invasive cardiology and neonatology services, in the approximate amount of $114 million. The financing in the renovation of the cardiothoracic intensive care unit, phase 2, in the amount of $12.3 million. The non-CON projects contemplate modernization of information systems, movable medical equipment, and various infrastructure projects. The security features for the tax-exempt FHA version will include FHA mortgage insurance, pledge of payments under the mortgage note, a 1-year debt service reserve fund, mortgages on real property acceptable to the FHA, a letter of credit to plug holes in the cash flow, and a mortgage reserve fund. The expected rating would be AA2 from Moody's and AA from S&P. Security features for the taxable option would be Ginnie Mae securities. Expected rating would be AAA Moody's and AA plus from S&P. Currently, Maimonides has no debt with DASNY. Maimonides Medical Center has issued 3 series of FHA debt up through 2004. That debt was refunded in 2013 through taxable Ginnie Mae bonds away from DASNY. Maimonides is a valued client and is returning to the DASNY portfolio with this transaction. Since Maimonides has debt outstanding with HUD, they're limited as to their financing opportunities. We're very pleased that Maimonides has come to DASNY for FHA and Ginnie Mae financing. Again, I think that this is an example where we have taken advantage of the One DASNY initiatives and able to bring a client back into our portfolio. FHA financing is a costly process. We've highlighted that in some fairly recent transactions where a hospital was trying to exit the FHA program due to the costly situations. Sadly, this institution does not have that option to exit, but they are limited to issue within this portfolio. So within the FHA finance cost line item in the sources and uses, there is a pretty significant number that you may have noticed, $8.2 million. I just wanted to point out a couple of the weighty costs in that. There's a 3 years prepaid mortgage insurance premium of $2.8 million included in that number. There's also AMPO, which is allowance to make projects operational, in the amount of $2.8 million in that number as well. Some positives: Maimonides has always made debt service payments timely. Maimonides Medical Center is also currently in a clinical affiliation and collaboration agreement with the Northwell Health System. They have nationally recognized and accredited centers of excellence, including Heart and Vascular Center, Outpatient Breast Center and Cancer Center, and a Stroke Center. And I believe they are also a performing provider for DSRIP funds for the Department of Health. Staff recommends that the board adopt a resolution to proceed for 40-year bond issue in an amount not to exceed $165 million on behalf of Maimonides Medical Center.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, George. John, do you have any comments on this one?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have some brief comments. Just like to elaborate briefly that Maimonides Medical Center is a 711-bed voluntary not-for-profit Article 28 acute care hospital located in Brooklyn, providing comprehensive array of acute care inpatient and outpatient services to the residents of Brooklyn and tertiary care inpatient services. Maimonides' sole member is Maimonides Health Resources, Inc. Affiliates of Maimonides are the Maimonides Research and Development Foundation, a not-for-profit corporation which solicits funds and awards grants primarily to MMC for research purposes, and MMC Holdings of Brooklyn for a for-profit company which provides certain support to MMC and the surrounding community. MMC also has a clinical affiliation and collaboration agreement, as mentioned, with Northwell Health through August 2020. This agreement enables Northwell Health to assist Maimonides in improving its clinical and financial condition. Both CONs have been contingently approved by the department, and the department recommends approval of this resolution to proceed with the understanding that before mailing of the POS, all contingencies will be satisfied. Thank you.
John, thank you. Are there questions?
I have just a small question. And this is, I don't understand the economics fully of healthcare delivery, but that patient days had a decrease over several years, which is noted as a positive operating factor, which I recognize, but as a financial factor, that does show a decrease in demand.
I think from a revenue perspective, the more efficiently the hospitals treat their patients, the better off they are from a reimbursement perspective, from a revenue perspective. By getting patients in and getting them out quickly, your average length of stay goes down, which is a positive trend. And again, healthcare is really shifting from inpatient to outpatient.
So the nature of the compensation structure is such that's a positive factor, both in terms of outcomes as well as in terms of financial health of the institution.
Correct.
I believe Tracy.
Great question. Thank you.
I believe Tracy yesterday mentioned the current status of the emergency room there and the need for the enhancement of that existing emergency room, right? And a lot of these funds are going to sort of
That's correct.
build back this emergency room that services a large part of Brooklyn.
Right.
Basically, I think that's what I got.
She indicated that if you went there, you would understand why the limitations of the project.
She did say that.
And this is, the goal is that this will become part of the North Well
System.
No, I mean, again, that's what's going on in the healthcare industry. People are linking up together. I mean, there's no guarantees. I mean, obviously, this, I think, is the second or third extension of the relationship with Northwell. So, I mean,
It just has to stand on its own, though. Right? It stands on its own.
Yes, it
That's
does.
correct.
yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I needed to, I was trying to think through whether I had a real question, and I don't. Any further questions? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? John Bellatudo, thank you. John Johnson, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Is there none opposed? The motion carries unanimously. The transaction is approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Behind tab 6 is the proposed Rockefeller University financing with David Ostrander presenting the transaction summary.
Morning.
Good morning, David, again.
Good morning.
The board is being asked to adopt a resolution to proceed for one or more series of tax-exempt and/or taxable, fixed and/or variable rate bonds in an amount not to exceed $310 million, with maturities not to exceed 40 years on behalf of the Rockefeller University. Bond proceeds will be used both for new money and refunding purposes. As far as the new money portion, proceeds will be used to reimburse the university for costs associated with the construction of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation David Rockefeller River Campus, which will add 2 acres and several buildings to the university's existing 14-acre campus. That portion of this financing will be approximately $90 million. Construction of the river campus began back in 2015 and is expected to be completed in the spring of this year. The project has been financed to date with a number of large donations, as well as $100 million in proceeds from bonds issued by DASNY back in 2015. As far as the refunding portion, proceeds will be used to refund the 2009A, 2009C, and possibly the 2010A bonds. The refunding will likely occur at different times, with the 2009A and the 2009C bonds, which are becoming currently callable in April of this year, being issued along with the new money, and the refunding of the 2010A bonds, which are not callable until next year, occurring at a later date. Assuming current market conditions, a total net present value savings in the range of $11.2 million, or 7% of the refunded bonds, is expected from the refunding of the 2009A and 2009C bonds. When looking at ratings, expected ratings, Moody's has assigned a rating of AA1 to the outstanding obligations of the university with a stable outlook. I will point out that Standard & Poor's recently adjusted the university's rating to AA with a stable outlook. We mailed this report on January 25th. Shortly after that, on the 29th, S&P put out the report, which assigned a AA rating to the university. Essentially, what happened there? The rating agency was informed of the new money debt, so they factored in the $90 million of additional debt, and they felt that rating was that debt level was more in the line of a AA rating versus a AA plus. With those ratings, the loan agreement is expected to be a general unsecured obligation of the university, which would be the same as previous Rockefeller bond issues. And then lastly, I'll just touch on some of the additional information in the report. I think that the members are familiar with Rockefeller. They're a longstanding DASNY client. They are a Center for Research and Graduate Education in the Biomedical Sciences. As you know, the university does not charge tuition to its graduate students, so its revenues are derived primarily from investment income, government grants, and fundraising. As far as the government grants, direct research has accounted for an average of $84 million in revenue annually over the last 5 years, with 85% of that amount coming from the National Institutes of Health. The university has focused considerable effort on increasing private support for its research programs, and that number has grown to a 5-year high of $23.4 million for fiscal year 2018. And as a result, the university's financial resources have grown, mainly due to the fundraising and a history of positive investment returns. So as of fiscal year end 2018, the university reported total net assets of over $2.7 billion. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, David. Are there questions for David? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Thank you, Darrell, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. 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 Is there none opposed? The motion carries. David, thank you.
Thank you. Behind tab 7 is the proposed Terrence Cardinal Cook Healthcare Center financing with Stephen Kozer presenting the transaction summary.
Good morning.
Morning, Steve.
The board is being asked to adopt a resolution to proceed for fixed and/or variable rate, tax-exempt and/or taxable bonds with a not-to-exceed amount of $50 million to be sold through a private placement issued at one or more times on behalf of Terrence Cardinal Cook Healthcare Center. This will be the institution's second DASNY bond issuance. Terrence Cardinal Cook also issued bonds in 1998, which defeased in 2014. Terrence Cardinal Cook is a not-for-profit corporation in New York City, which operates an Article 28 facility licensed by the Department of Health, as well as an Article 16 program under New York's mental hygiene law, which is licensed by the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. The institution is a member of Catholic Healthcare System, also known as ArchCare. ArchCare operates 5 skilled nursing facilities, as well as programs at Calvary Hospital and many home-based and community programs. ArchCare has been managing Terrence Cardinal Cook since 2004. Terrence Cardinal Cook provides a comprehensive range of services, which is unique for healthcare service providers in New York State. The 559 beds licensed by DOH include a 57-bed residential dialysis unit, a 48-bed neurodegenerative disease unit, and a 156-bed HIV/AIDS unit. The institution also operates a 56-bed specialty hospital for children and young adults with profound neurological impairments and other complex medical conditions. And this specialty hospital is the Article 16 facility licensed by OPWDD. Approximately $20 million of the proposed bond issue will be used to finance the renovation costs associated with expanding and relocating the institution's specialty hospital. The specialty hospital has been approved by OPWDD to expand to 72 beds, and there will be a prior property approval, or PPA, associated with this portion of the project. The PPA will provide the commitment by OPWDD to reimburse the institution for all principal and interest associated with this portion of the bond issuance. In addition to the expansion and relocation of the specialty hospital, Terrence Cardinal Cook will also be financing various upgrades and deferred maintenance projects across its campus, including replacing and relocating a kitchen, installing a new generator, upgrading elevators, and updating its fire systems. These are all considered notice projects with the Department of Health and do not require a certificate of need. Bonds are expected to be privately placed at Sterling National Bank, a qualified institutional buyer. Bonds will be drawdown bonds with a variable rate of interest during the drawdown period of up to 3 years and then convert to a fixed rate. The purchaser will have a 10-year hold period upon conversion for a total hold period of up to 13 years from closing. Principal will amortize over a period of 25 years upon conversion to the fixed rate. The purchaser has agreed to accommodate 2 closings, with the first closing expected to be this spring and the second closing expected to occur in December of this year. And that's really just to give the institution additional time to draw down the project costs for the financing. Security as required by the purchaser is expected to include a mortgage, a pledge of revenues, and a pledge of assets. And there's also expected to be financial covenants required by the purchaser. Overall, the institution has had occupancy of approximately 96% in recent years. The specialty hospital has been operating at capacity, and there's a waiting list for these services. While the institution operates with a working capital deficiency, ArchCare provides financial support to Terrence Cardinal Cook as necessary. As of December 31st, 2017, ArchCare's foundation had $37 million of cash and investments and $747,000 of total liabilities. Terrence Cardinal Cook, their operating gain or loss has fluctuated over the last 5 years, with margins ranging from a low of negative 2.8% to a high of positive 1.6%. As of December 31st, 2017, Terrence Cardinal Cook had net assets of approximately $9.5 million. In closing, I also wanted to notify the board that DASNY is providing additional services for the project beyond the financing. Prior to the issuance of the PPA for the specialty hospital, OPWDD is requiring architectural, cost, and quality reviews of the design for appropriateness. These reviews are typically done by OPWDD for their other projects. However, for a complex project like the specialty hospital, they don't have the in-house expertise to do those reviews. So DASNY's construction and design department is going to perform those reviews on behalf of OPWDD for the client. And I just wanted to mention that as another way of DASNY's finance and construction teams working together to service our clients. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Are there questions for Steve? Please.
I just asked the same question as before. So ArchCare is controlled by the Archdiocese of New York, but is a separate entity. So therefore, it's not exposed to the liabilities of the Archdiocese.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And although there's no requirement, there's no agreement between ArchCare and TCC that ArchCare will provide support should TCC need it, you all are comfortable with their expectation to do so in the event the need arises.
That's right. And, you know, ArchCare is really set up to manage TCC and these other nursing homes, as well as certain other programs in the communities. So it's not like they're operating another facility and then also just taking on the liabilities of Terrence Cardinal Cook. There's no guarantee on the bonds. However, they are willing to provide financial support, and the financial statements indicate that they're willing to do so, so long as they're associated with each other.
And ArchCare gets its funding from the Catholic Church in New York.
ArchCare, in recent years, they sold a nursing home, so I believe that's a large part of where their balance sheet is supported by.
Okay.
So I think they're pretty independent from the church.
So then I guess it's a separate entity from the Archdiocese, but it's controlled by the Archbishop?
Ultimately, they're set up to serve the mission, but it is a separate legal entity.
Thanks, Steve. Questions for Steve? Other questions for Steve? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Wellington, thank you. Thank you very much, Paul, for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Is there none opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Behind tab 8, is State University of New York University Hospital at Syracuse, transaction with Portia Lee presenting.
Thank you very much. Behind tab 8 is a TELP financing on behalf of SUNY University Hospital at Syracuse in an amount not to exceed $23.2 million. As you know, it's the policy of Public Authorities Control Board that financings which exceed $10 million in a 12-month period be brought before this board and PACB for approval. There's an attached equipment list which outlines various nursing, IT, perioperative services equipment, and other types of equipment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Portia. Questions for Portia about the proposed TELP financing? Hearing none, may I have a motion please to approve? John Delatorre, thank you. Bill, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Now, I'm going to recuse myself because I'm on the board of Upstate Medical Council.
All right, then the record then will reflect that the Vice Chairman has recused himself from this vote.
Okay.
Behind tab 9 is the United Health Services Hospitals, Inc. Transaction, and Portia Lee is going to present it.
Thank you very much. Behind tab 9 is the TELP financing on behalf of United Health Services Hospitals, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $10.0 million. Again, as you know, current policy of Public Authorities Control Board is that leases which exceed $10 million in a 12-month period be brought before this board and PACB for approval. There's an attached equipment list which outlines various equipment, including OR, radiology, IT, and other equipment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Portia, thank you. Some of you may recall, let's do the vote first. Are there questions for Portia? Hearing none. May I have a motion to approve the transaction? Beryl, thank you. Is there a second? Paul, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. As there are none opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Some of you may recall that our member, Sandra Shepard, months ago asked the question whether it might be reasonable to consider raising the threshold amount for PACB and board approval. I didn't realize I was reiterating with Portia, but I asked the same question a couple of days ago, and staff is going to undertake to sit down and talk to the right people to see what's appropriate. I want Portia to get that into the record.
Absolutely.
We go on to management reports. First one is the report of the president.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning again. We remain very excited by the receptivity that we have been receiving from our partners and clients across the state, both in our public finance practice as well as our construction practice. Both Portia and Steve have been communicating with our partners about the money change that we have put in place, and we're seeing a lot of receptivity. That's very important. And people are beginning to really reflect their balance sheet and their commitment to that. We're doing 3 design build projects. We have a life sciences P3 project coming forward. You've seen the many opportunities, particularly in the healthcare space. And when we came to you approximately 2 years ago, through the work that a number of our partners had done internally and externally, we saw the flow of dollars primarily in the healthcare segment going into taxable. And so we recognized that we needed to be responsive. We had been talking about providing a hybrid solution, and with the changes that we put in place, as well as the Montefiore transaction, that has had huge implications for us. And so we feel very good about that, and it's reflected. In addition, we are reintroducing our TELP capability. We've rebranded it. We're putting that back out, and we are introducing an energy services corporation. We now have an RFP out, so we have a procurement that's very comprehensive. will report back to you in a month. A couple of things that I just wanted to highlight with respect to Governor Cuomo's fiscal year 2019 and 2020 budget. Again, I note that we are doing design build in our city portfolio. It is, in fact, a game changer. We also are focused on a number of other alternative delivery strategies, construction manager build, construction manager at risk. But it's important to note that the governor's budget, proposed budget, would give us the authorization to do design build and other alternative delivery methods such as construction manager at risk and construction manager build and other segments of our portfolio. So that's very important. We're supporting that. We would be one of the beneficiaries of that opportunity as well. DASNY is also proud of our commitment and leadership as we continue to execute on advancing beyond the goal of 30% MWBE participation on our state contracts. As you know, inclusion is very important to who we are and what we do. And we talk about innovation, we talk about growth, but we also talk about inclusion. The governor proposed budget reauthorizes and expands New York MWBE program. Under the proposal, the state's MWBE law would be expanded and applied to all state-funded entities, including counties and local governments. That's very important in terms of what is prospective. The executive budget proposal also would grant DASNY permanent authorization to provide design and construction management services to the State Department of Environmental Construction and the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. So DASNY has been working with DEC and Parks since 2011. Notably, DASNY has collaborated with Parks by managing more than $70 million in projects to update Niagara Falls State Park, the oldest state park in the nation. The project recently received special recognition, and I will go into that in more detail in a few minutes. The executive budget also clarifies DASNY's authority to finance healthcare projects covered under both the Medical Care Facilities Finance Agency, MCFA Act, and DASNY's authorizing statute. If the project can be financed in its entirety by the MCFA Act, such as a traditional hospital or ancillary facility, such as a primary care center, then we use the MCFA Act. If not, then we use the DASNY statute if available. Vital Brooklyn, very important initiative for health as well as DASNY. DASNY is an important part of the Governor's Vital Brooklyn initiative, which focuses on increasing access to open spaces and healthy food while transforming the healthcare system by increasing access and the quality of healthcare services and preventive care. Vital Brooklyn will also create a stronger, more sustainable central Brooklyn by prioritizing strategic investments in resiliency and affordable housing, as well as job creation, youth development, and community violence prevention. So the governor has focused on a holistic set of solutions as it relates to this community and communities across the state. But this is a very important project that we are central to in partnering with the Department of Health, as well as many of our other sister and brethren entities. The executive budget proposal provides additional authorization for DASNY's Atlantic Avenue Healthcare Property Holding Corporation subsidiary as part of the Governor's Vital Brooklyn initiative to sell, exchange, transfer, lease, and convey real property located in Brooklyn upon direction by the Commissioner of New York State Division of Homes and Community Renewal. Yesterday, Governor Cuomo announced a $204 million to support 95 projects that will protect and transform New York State's healthcare system. The funding from the statewide healthcare facility transformation program will improve patient care through the development of high-quality medical facilities and programs serving the inpatient, primary care, mental health, substance use disorder, and long-term care needs of communities throughout the state. The funding was awarded under the statewide healthcare facility transformation program, which was enacted as part of the fiscal year 2018 budget. The program administered by the Department of Health and DASNY will help support the objectives of the Delivery System Reform Incentive Program. On January 29th, I delivered the keynote address at the Bond Buyers National Outlook Conference in New York City. I spoke about the many changes we have introduced within DASNY and outlined the positive impact DASNY has made and continues to make throughout the state. I conveyed that through our One DASNY initiative, we are broadening our mission through market expansion, top-line growth, focused on minimizing risk and driving efficiencies across our entire organization, as well as broadening and deepening our mission. These steps are enabling us to better assist our partners in higher education and healthcare. On January the 17th, I also had the opportunity to sit down and update the bond buyer with Andrew Cohen for a podcast interview. Topics ranged from the success that we have, as well as our #1 ranking as an issuer across the nation, the second time in 4 years, and how do we remain relevant, competitive in an ever-changing marketplace, and what can our clients expect in our 75th year, our 75th anniversary. It was a good conversation, and it's available. I can share it with you. With that, I will turn it over to Portia, who will provide a market update.
Thank you, Gerard. Briefly, the new issue supply for the year is a little less than $25 billion year to date. That's up about 10% from levels from last year this time. Total supply for this week is expected to be about $8 billion. U.S. government bonds were broadly weaker with higher yields across the curve as investors were digesting Friday's strong economic data. Municipal bonds were following the move in treasuries, were also weaker in the intermediate to long end of the curve. Bond funds have reported inflows for the week ending January 30th. That marks the 4th consecutive week of inflows to the muni bond funds. 1 and 10-year MMD have decreased by 10 and 4 basis points since the January board meeting, and the 30-year MMD has increased by 3 basis points. Just for reference, the 1 year is 161, the 10 year is 219, and the 30 year is 305. Just a brief update on our client outreach efforts. We continue to reach out to clients as part of the One DASNY initiative. We met with Northwell a couple of weeks ago, talked to them about the process improvements and efficiencies in our bond issuance process. We also talked about, as Gerard had indicated, the TELP program and our construction services. We actually have a follow-up meeting scheduled with Northwell to further discuss our construction services. So we will keep you updated. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Also want to highlight Board Chair Alfonso Carney and I honored 17 retirees and 71 employees celebrating milestone service anniversaries from 10 years to 35 years of service. This was at our Albany office. Within that week, 2 days later, in our New York City office, Al and I honored 7 retirees and 17 employees celebrating milestone service anniversaries who were based in New York City. We had the pleasure of relaying to them our gratitude for the years of public service. Each of them has been an advocate for change management, and the work they have done on behalf of DASNY and the people of New York has truly made a difference. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for being present.
It was a real pleasure, real pleasure. May I add that both programs are really well put together. I wish occasionally, if you have time, you won't have it for another year, but if time permits, it's worthwhile to stick your head into that recognition ceremony. It's really a wonderful thing to see. People are very grateful to be recognized individually, and a lot of smiles in the two rooms. Also, Deborah Fasser actually puts that program together, and I think you do a magnificent job of just helping to pull it together. A lot of moving parts and a lot of disparate things happening. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. My team does a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. The Engineering News Record has named DASNY's restoration work on Niagara Falls State Park's Cave of the Winds Plaza a national winner for Best of the Best Renovation/Restoration. DASNY managed $70 million in projects to update the oldest state park in the nation. The work, which included landscaping, removing and replacing walkways, reconfiguring spaces, replacing handrails, rails, and constructing new concessions, has made this world-renowned park more accessible, safe, and interactive. That concludes my report. I will now transition to Steve Cora.
Thank you. Good morning. Behind tab 12 are the three construction division board reports, starting with the construction projects report. On the cover are a couple of photos of the recently completed Rockland Psychiatric Center new electrical system upgrade project. The scope of the project was to demolish an existing electrical feeder system, including electrical equipment at buildings 1, 17, 19, 68, and 116 on campus, and demolishing the feeder system from each of those buildings to the main campus switchgear. We then installed new pad-mounted switchgear and upgraded switches and transformers at those 5 buildings. We also upgraded the campus-wide lighting and distribution system. The project budget was $6.6 million. We started design in July of 2014, completed design in September of 2015. O'Brien and Gear were our design consultants. Construction started in September of 16 and completed in October of 18. And Fanschwa Construction was our electrical general contractor. A couple of special features regarding the project were the challenges in coordinating the electrical shutdowns across the campus. Many of the facilities that this project worked through were occupied at the time of the project. So the shutdowns had to occur overnight and in the early morning hours to minimize impacts to the operating facility. In addition, safety was at the forefront of everyone's mind and a major project challenge, given much of the work was performed underground and an electrical distribution manhole and inside the occupied facility. On page 3 of the construction projects report, there are 5 new projects added to our workload. Hustos Community College, we have a chiller replacement project valued at $5.2 million. At New York City Tech, we have a mechanical HVAC project valued at $5.1 million. In Rochester, at the Rochester Site Center, we have a conversion of existing space to forensic space valued at $6 million. SUNY Oneonta, we're renovating Huntington Hall at $18.8 million. And at SUNY Morrisville, we're renovating Stewart Hall at $17.7 million. So the total value of new projects is around $53 million. The single drop project, which is noted at the bottom of the report page, was removed from our reporting as the authorized budget for the project was adjusted below the $5 million threshold for which projects are included in this report. On page 8 are construction expenditures through December. Through December 2017, construction expenditures valued $666 million, and through December of 2018, expenditures are valued at $540 million. That's a decrease of $126 million. Just an update on a couple of projects and programs. On the SUNY side, our 4 capital projects under construction today at Albany, Alfred, Buffalo State, and Plattsburgh, totaling over $80 million in project value, continue to progress to a summer 2019 substantial completion date in time for fall 2019 occupancy. We have 35 summer projects during 2019 with a value in excess of $40 million that at this time have been assigned or awarded, ensuring an appropriate amount of time for pre-construction activities to take place and ensuring a mid-May 2019 start date at the many SUNY campuses these projects will take place at. On the Gozer front, our Gozer portfolio continues to move from design to construction, with new construction phase starts increasing as we move into the spring of 2019. We have our next executive meeting with Gozer scheduled for Tuesday, February 19th. This is in addition to our biweekly meetings with the Gozer staff. OPWDD, the Community Minor Maintenance Program. We reported late in 2018 that we received 96 minor maintenance projects. Those projects have now advanced to design, with construction scheduled to begin for the outdoor projects in the spring/summer season of 2019. At South Beach Psychiatric Center, our curtain wall activities are concluding as building enclosure is becoming a reality, allowing for interior drywall activities to commence. MEP and light gauge metal framing activities continue to advance throughout the project, as well as punched window installation. Project substantial completion date is now November of 2019, which was moved back from the original baseline completion date of June 2019. At FIT, we continue with a redesign effort to align the project scope with the project's construction budget. The results of our project architect's efforts will be presented on Monday, February 11th to FIT for consideration. And on the Life Sciences Lab project, the $750 million project's basis for design is concluding given the recent site determination announced. DASNY continues to work on the design-build contract language and RFP document, which will be released following the PACB's project approval. DASNY has added a chief project manager, Paul McCoy, to manage this project on DOH's behalf. And additional project and program status reports are included for NYCHA, Moynihan Station, and Javits behind tab 12. Lastly, DASNY presented at the SUNY PPAA conference yesterday and again this morning up in Saratoga Springs. Yesterday we presented DASNY's One DASNY efforts, our Western New York Construction Division realignment, our project status updates, our interior design efforts on many SUNY community college campuses, and our ESCO program. And this morning, DASNY sat on a panel associated with the Chancellor's Net Zero Energy Directive, along with SUNY and NYSERDA. Our first project moving in this direction is a retrofit residence hall renovation project at SUNY Oneonta, Ford Hall. We are currently in the bridging document phase for the project. And lastly, we're also recruiting for a site safety manager to join the construction division to oversee and build up our internal project safety vision. That concludes my report.
Thanks, Steve. Questions for Steve? I have one. The $53 million in new projects? Mm-hmm. Is that since the beginning of the calendar year?
Those are projects that were added in since our last board meeting.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. It's terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're going to go a bit out of order and go to tab 14. Ask Kimberly whether or not you have anything additional. See what to add to your. We know there are other things in the tab. But,
I don't have anything additional to add to the financial report.
okay.
Al,
fine.
did you want to address the resolution at this point?
Yes,
It's in
I
there?
did. I just can't find it.
Should be behind the financial report.
Last.
Ah, I see. Black line and other, thank you. We have for your consideration and approval a resolution authorizing named employees to approve and execute investment transactions. Kimberly, are there new people added or deleted from these?
Now, the resolution is in response to the investments team bringing on one new employee that completes the complement for that team. And in order for that individual to participate in transacting and transferring certain of the funds, we need the board's approval for that person to transact in that capacity. There is nobody being taken off of the list.
Okay. Questions for Ken? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the resolution? Thank you very much, Paul. Wellington, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. None opposed, the motion carries unanimously. And we'll go back to the report of the general counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the September meeting, I reported to the board that the Securities and Exchange Commission had in the prior month, August 2018, released certain amendments to the municipal securities disclosure requirements at SEC Rule 15C212. I indicated we would be consulting with our external disclosure and bond counsel as well as other stakeholders to determine the impact of these changes on DASNY's business, as well as the potential impacts to our clients, and that we would report back before the new amendments became effective. Subsequent to that meeting, the SEC took appropriate action, and the compliance date was affixed as February 27th of 2019. So the rule will become effective for continuing disclosure agreements entered into in connection with transactions after that date. In very, very brief form, the rule was amended to include 2 additional events, the occurrence of which will require the filing of a public notice with the MSRB through the EMMA system. The 2 events, numbered 15 and 16, cover in pertinent part the incurrence of a financial obligation of the obligated person, if material, or agreement to certain covenants or other financial terms of the obligated person, any of which affect security holders, if material. So that's the first event. And then the second event, number 16, deals with any default or similar events under a financial obligation of the obligated person, if any such event reflects financial difficulties. So in both rules, you can see very, very clearly they're focused on the obligated person. So I'll start my comments by noting that this amendment will not have any impact on DASNY or its financing programs. First, because for purposes of Rule 15C212, an obligated person is a person committed by contract or other agreement to support payment of all or part of the applicable bonds. DASNY, as a conduit issuer, is never the obligated person, regardless of whether or not DASNY elects to be a party to a continuing disclosure agreement. So strictly from a definitional standpoint, the facts and circumstances that are relevant to these 2 new tests are really within the knowledge of the conduit borrower and not with DASNY. Second, neither new event will be a DASNY responsibility under our continuing disclosure agreements entered into on or after the effective date of this amendment. As has been reported previously, DASNY approximately 1 year ago undertook changes in its private client financing continuing disclosure agreements that in effect make us not a party to those agreements. So any responsibility in a true conduit transaction to report under SEC Rule 15 C212 rests exclusively with the private client borrower and has for some time, and that's been going well. In the event we're engaged in a transaction where DASNY is a party to a continuing disclosure agreement, such as a school district closing, the continuing disclosure agreement will be amended to reflect that any responsibility to undertake additional disclosure under these two new events will rest with the conduit borrower and not with DASNY. And finally, with respect to state-supported debt transactions such as PIT or sales tax, the obligation to file is the same, and the Division of the Budget is currently reviewing the new amendment to ensure compliance of its master disclosure agreement with the requirements of the new rule. At my request, we consulted with ORIC on this as the External Disclosure Council, given their involvement with DASNY 2 years ago on the MCDC initiative, to make sure that that what we do for purposes of complying with this amendment is consistent with not only the new rule, but with the initiatives that we undertook as a result of MCDC. And I would say that we were able to harmonize everything, and we feel that we're on solid footing. But if any board member wants to ask questions about a specific client or a specific strategy or something that goes to the credit of one of our borrowers, I'm happy to take that as part of executive session when I do my regular report. But otherwise, feel free to ask any general questions that you may have. Thank you.
Are there general questions before we go into an executive session?
It's just one quick question.
Sure.
Understood, Michael, thank you, that DASNY does not have direct responsibility as the conduit issuer. But does DASNY have any responsibility sort of to be the conduit passer of this information to the obligated parties that are obligated under this new regulation?
In theory, and I'm thinking more along the lines of the types of events that we may have notice of first. We may have to share information, but certainly we do not have the responsibility to the bondholders to post or report that. And again, I'd be looking at the pooled financing type scenario with a school district involved, where you have, let's say, 3 school districts from 3 different communities in a series of bonds, and there's a default in community A. Well, community B and C are not going to know about that, so as that trickles up and makes its way around, we just make sure the information is properly shared. Would you like to add anything to that portion?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that these 2 new events are have been widely discussed in the industry, to the extent that a private client comes in. Through the working group process, I think all the third-party professionals, as well as we, are well aware of them. It comes up in the normal course of events and discussion, and is something that would be handled through that process. Again, recognizing that we, don't have any obligation here, as we're not a party to the continuing disclosure agreement.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mike? Then may I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of particular corporations, proposed, pending, or current litigation, and the employment history of particular persons or matters relating to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of particular persons. Thank you, John. Joe, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are going into executive session. Staff. The record will reflect that the members have just left an executive session during which no decisions were made other than to return to the public session. Is there any other business to come before the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion please to adjourn? John Johnson, thank you for the motion. Darrell, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye.